Life's a bit like an iceberg. Not in a Titanic sense, but it's a little bit like an iceberg, right? You see this bit, but there's all this bit underneath, right? That's a pretty standard metaphor. And life's kind of like that, and the stories we tell especially, right? The stories that we might know are this little bit at the top, but the fact is the story of somebody's life is a lot more. And I was thinking about this just this week because this is the story of Jesus, right? We have these 4 Gospels that tell us the story of Jesus, but really, we're only getting a fraction, right? We're only getting the highlight reel. So the fact that there's 30-something miracle stories across the 4 Gospels, and bear in mind some of those are repeated because they're in more than one Gospel, right? There's 30-something miracle stories, but you know as well as I do that Jesus never followed a sort of, I'll do 1 miracle a day, or, that was my miracle this week. I'll have to wait till next week to do something else cool. There was probably miracles happening all the time that we would call miracles. You also know as well as I do that we often take this tactic with Jesus doing miracles that either it's a miracle that reveals the divine power of Jesus, or we have some way of understanding it that it's a metaphor, that it really means something else, it didn't really happen that way, or we explain it. Right? Jesus didn't miraculously make enough food appear to feed 5,000 people. He managed to convince people to find stuff on themselves that they would share with others, and so everyone was fed. That's a really cool explanation of that story. It's still a miracle because, 5,000 people all sharing at once. Are you kidding me? That's a miracle. But nonetheless, however you look at those miracle stories, they're all still a miracle. They're still amazing. And we get this little fraction of all of the cool and amazing things that Jesus probably did. And then there's this story. Because it's not like most miracle stories. It's a healing story. I have to say, personally, I think all the miracle stories are healing stories of some sort or another. Even the stories like the calming the storm, that's kind of a healing of nature aspect to it. Even turning the water into wine, right? And there's a miracle happening there. There's a healing aspect to that too. Imagine what would happen if they'd found out there was no more wine. Imagine how that person's reputation would be ruined if there was no more wine. Nobody needed to know Jesus got it. There's a healing aspect to all of the miracle stories. It's just that we tend to look at healing a certain way. We're looking literally at the Band-Aid part. That's the healing. Except it's not. And here's a miracle story that's not like other miracle stories that should show us pretty clearly that healing isn't just about the Band-Aid. So first of all, let me say a couple of things about this story. The reason the guy was sitting there in the first place is because that pool, the story behind that pool, is that the water is still until every so often an angel moving its wings causes the water to move. And when the water moves, first person in gets healed. That kind of takes away all the drama of the story, doesn't it, actually? But that was the story behind it. If you had to sit there and wait, and then when the water moved, you had to be the first one in. So when Jesus says to the man, do you want to be healed? And his reason is that he doesn't have anyone to get him in the water. I'm going back to the excuse part, right? He didn't have anyone to get him in the water. That's what he's talking about. So here's the thing, though. He's been there for 38 years. And somehow he does manage to get there, go home, come back. Somehow manages to get fed. He managed to have a life around the fact that he sits next to this pool of water every day for a very long time. What do you think that tells you about this person? There's more than, and by the way, the story doesn't say what's wrong with him. And it may not be a mobility issue simply because he does manage to get there. It's not like he can sit there the whole time, every moment of every day. Or if he does, it's not like somebody doesn't bring him food. So there are people who are helping him. So what's the deal here? Why is he still there? It doesn't matter whether you interpret this story as meaning he's still there because this is his excuse not to get healed. He doesn't really want to be healed. He's not making any effort. Or you think, yes, he does. He does want to be healed. But somehow, his spirit has been broken through all that waiting. There's still healing that's required beyond the physical healing of whatever his ailment is that brought him there in the first place. There's more than just the physical aspect to this healing story. Not to mention the fact that every other healing story, someone comes to Jesus and says they want to be healed. Here, Jesus asks them. It's like he was walking by, saw this guy and went, "Hey, you." That's not how we usually hear these stories. People find their way to Jesus. They want to be healed. He doesn't have to ask them. There's also no declaration of faith here. We don't hear Jesus say, "Your faith has made you well, go your way." We hear him say, "Get up." Right? This is a kind of a funny story. Because it appears as though the man doesn't really want to be healed. Or if he does, his spirit has been broken to the point where he can't do it. He doesn't even know who Jesus is, apparently. He doesn't recognize the power in Jesus like so many others did. But Jesus recognizes his brokenness. He recognizes that there's something broken here much more than this person's body. Because we're reading a story too, there's no indication here as to whether or not Jesus says, "Get up, come on," or "Get up." We don't know what Jesus' tone is here, although it's Jesus, so you can make a fair guess. But we don't know. But it doesn't matter, really. Because Jesus simply says, "Yes, you can. Get up. Go your way." He doesn't even smack him on the forehead, say, "Be healed." He just says, "Get up." What kind of a healing story is that? There's none of the excitement of the, making the paste with the water and the mud, and there's none of the laying on of hands thing. There's none of the action. There's no declaration of faith. There's none of that other stuff. There's simply, "Yes, you can. Go on." What's healed here is much more than the physical body. There's spirit. There's a healing of wholeness. There's, I think, the part where we sometimes fall down when we think of healing. If you can see it, it can be healed. What if you can't? What do you do if you can't see it? What if it's something you can't name or label? What do you do? See, I think sometimes we're so quick to bring the Band-Aid that we've forgotten about the other part. We've forgotten about the care and compassion. It does seem kind of funny, doesn't it, though? That here I am saying we've forgotten about the care and the compassion part. And basically this story goes like this. Do you want to be healed? Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of, get up, go on your way. And then Jesus moves on. He didn't hang around. He doesn't wait to hear his story. There's another piece that's missing. He doesn't seem to hear his story. And then he moves on. And it's dun dun dun, the Sabbath. So on top of everything else in this story, we also have to throw in the element of Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And you know that's going to get him in trouble. And if you read on in the story, indeed it does. Here's the thing. Healing is about wholeness. And wholeness doesn't have a time frame either. We could very, very easily assume that Jesus is healing on the Sabbath because he knows it's going to get him in trouble. And there are certainly stories that would seem to indicate that, where he's challenged about it, and it becomes an issue of challenging the idea that that's what the Sabbath is all about in the first place. But again, Sabbath isn't about sitting around doing nothing. Sabbath is taking time from all of that other stuff you do to make sure that you are whole with God. That's what it's really about. Again, it's about wholeness. It's about our relationship with God. It's about our relationship with others. And most importantly, our relationship with ourselves. It makes perfect sense to me that this story would happen on the Sabbath. Because it isn't just about healing one part of this person, it's about bringing them wholeness. That's what we need in life. We crave in life wholeness. It's not enough. It's not enough to have a physical hurt that's healed. It's not enough even to simply ignore the physical thing and take care of the spirit. We got to do those things together. In order to be whole, we need all of those things to happen together. Our quest shouldn't always be simply for healing. It should be for wholeness. Because wholeness comes in many forms. Here's another issue that I have with healing stories. What if you are somebody who is living with a disability? Jesus will heal you. Our whole approach to that makes it sound like there's something wrong. But what if that's who you are? It is what you have lived with since you were born. It is what you live with in your life. It's who you are. Our immediate assumption is you're broken. But maybe you're not. Maybe it's who you are. And here's the other aspect of this story that is part of all of the miracle stories of Jesus. This story isn't about making whole just about making whole something that was broken. It's about the fact that wholeness brings something else. Wholeness is inclusive. Wholeness says who you are, whole is who you are. Think of the language that we usually use in this story, even. Invalid. I'm not even sure that we use that word commonly anymore. But think about what that word means. Because it literally means invalid. No, you're not. You're not. Think of the language that we use around people who deal with disabilities and handicaps. We say someone is disabled instead of this person lives with a disability. This is becoming more, you might have seen this recently, that there's now there's a whole dialogue, whole discussion going around about what the language is that we should use. Because it's a question of people first language. And the reason for that is that it brings inclusivity. Recognize the person for who the person is. There are other things, sure, but person first. And that's another thing about the healing stories with Jesus. Jesus is about the person. He doesn't focus on whatever the problem is exclusively. He looks for wholeness. He creates an environment for wholeness. He restores people. He reconnects people. That's our job. Each of us, too. We're Jesus now. That's our job. People first. Creating space where people can feel whole for who they are. Inviting them into that space. That's the one aspect of this story that's not miraculous, because we can do that. It's challenging, and it requires some thought, particularly around the language that we use and how we treat people. But we can do that. We often do sometimes resort to, well, that's a great story that Jesus was able to do that, but I'm not Jesus. Yes, you are Jesus. Yes, you are. And yes, we are capable of that. We are capable of that healing. We are capable of reaching out to people and bringing wholeness. We are capable of that. We are capable of restoring spirit, engaging people in a way that brings them to healing. And you don't just do it by smacking them on the forehead and they fall over and they get up and they're good. We do it with engagement. It's, yes, a two-way street, which is the other awesome thing about this story. Jesus doesn't say, I have healed you. I don't think Jesus ever says, I have healed you. But here he simply says, get up. You can do it. Get up. Go. Do it. We are capable of this miracle. We are. In engaging people, helping people to share their story and be healed, to find wholeness. We are capable of that.